plenty people talking. The argument has been, why now? Why now after so many years? And there's always been this argument of accountability, whether the states will apologize for its role in slavery or not. A few months ago, actually, sometime last year, when Prince William and his wife traveled to the Caribbean, and there was a big euphoria about this. The fact that whether they will acknowledge the role that the royal family played in slavery. That didn't happen. What does this mean? And how would this money, this £100 million, be distributed? That's coming up very, very soon. But now let's turn our attentions to ethnicity pay gap. This phenomenon is something that has gripped many of our minority ethnic groups here in the UK and also across other parts of the world. But now we're concentrating in the UK. I spoke to Diane Grayson, who is the founder of Ethnicity Pay Gap Campaign, about this phenomenon and how it can be resolved or how it can be addressed. Let's take a quick listen to this clip.
There was an article that was posted on a social media platform, which we were debating, and we were all quite horrified that this was happening. We were very concerned, and somebody just said to me, "Oh, what should we do about it?" And I was like, "I don't really know." So, I ruminated about it. I thought about it. After a month, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I created a hashtag ethnicity pay gap t-shirt because I'm not quite sure if you know the Me Too movement happened in America, and they had a Me Too t-shirt, and that's what inspired me to do it. So I did that, and astonishingly, I had found that I had been reading an article in The Guardian where they said there was a £3.2 billion ethnicity pay gap, and that was in 2018, and that further fueled my passion and desire to take action.
I also wondered why do you think, this phenomenon has been very difficult to discuss within society or nationally, if I may put it so?
Well, the main reason is because it's a race issue. When people start talking about race, suddenly everybody keeps quiet and thinks that suddenly, we're going to start pointing fingers. So whenever there's a race issue, it's a challenge. It seems to be a challenge for many, many people. And I think also the fact that the government isn't behind it, like they were behind the gender pay gap, is another thing. They have shied away for quite some time, making ethnicity pay gap mandatory to report. So hence causing a challenge. And people, I think, are assuming that it doesn't exist. So, for example, I had a meeting with a lady just before I came to have a conversation with you, and she said she only literally just found out about the ethnicity pay gap and all the associated issues. So there are so many people out there who are ignorant, and also there are people out there who are ignoring it.
Oh, wow. I mean, you mentioned the government there. Do you think it's a case of, we're dealing with gender pay gap, so ethnicity pay gap is not as serious as gender pay gap?
It is as serious as the gender pay gap. And again, that term just infuriates me. One thing, when I was doing all my research, I recognized it was all about gender pay gap. And very rarely did you hear about the ethnicity pay gap. And I think people need to note that ethnic women are penalised twice, by the ethnicity pay gap and by the gender pay gap. So it is a huge issue that needs to be addressed.
Interesting. I agree. You tend to realize that when you speak to women in the corporate world, in every walk of life, really, especially if you happen to be a minority, the issue is to deal with the fact that you have a different skin color to the people that you're working with. Then the fact that you're a woman comes in as well. How has this initiative been taken? What is the response, and is there an appetite for change?
I think the response has been good, but I think it could be a lot better. I think there needs to be a bigger outpouring of conversations and activity to make it even bigger. My objective this year is to really try and advertise and speak to as many people as possible to be able to make the reach even bigger. Because I know if I walk down the street and just stop somebody randomly in the streets and ask them, do they know what the ethnicity pay gap is, they'll probably say no. So there needs to be more impetus into raising awareness. Hence why I created the Ethnicity Pay Gap Day, which I created in 2021. I did it because I needed to raise awareness. I needed to get people speaking about it at home, speaking about it at work. You know, this is a conversation that needs to happen.
And I just want to talk about, some of the articles that you've written. And the one that came across was, with the headline, Ethnicity Pay Gap is a Human Rights Issue, which, I mean, if you look deeper into it, it actually makes sense. On a superficial level, to be honest with you, I must admit, I never looked at it like that. Can you just elaborate a little bit more as to why you deem it a human rights issue?
It's a human rights issue because people have the right to be treated fairly. And to be treated fairly means fairly in everything that we do. So we should be, as people, should be treated fairly and be paid fairly. And as I said to you before, it's not just about the financial aspect of it. It's also about the people behind it, because at the end of the day, the people were, we did some research in 2022, which was focusing on the impact of ethnicity pay gap on Black women. But what it demonstrated to us is that there was a mental challenge as well, because the people generally in these situations are, ethnicity pay gap doesn't happen in isolation. So generally, there's something else also going on within that organisation. So mental stress was evidenced, and I was really quite surprised that the stress and anxiety that is caused makes it a challenge to the individuals to get reparations for what they deserve. And that, in a nutshell, is why I'm saying to you, it's a human rights issue. People have the right to be treated fairly.
I mean, one argument, which I'll come on to very soon to do with your article, your letter to some politicians. But one might also argue that at the end of the day, for this to actually come to fruition, is down to organizations to also, heed to this.
Yes.
Should organizations, I think in essence, what I'm trying to ask is, should organizations be compelled to produce the data as to, when it comes to ethnicity pay gap?
I think the short answer is yes, because at the end of the day, that's what they had to do for gender. So that's what they're going to have to really do for the ethnicity pay gap. There are organisations that are doing it, but there are not enough organisations that are doing it. And at the end of the day, what the ethnicity pay gap is, it is a discrimination against a person to be treated unfairly. So why is it being allowed to carry on?
I know this might sound a bit, commonsensical, but why do you think that is?
Why? Because there is a lot of structural racism and discrimination. And, I've always said that within the workplace, the ethnicity pay gap starts from the entry. From entry, it starts, and then when you're looking to be promoted, and then at pension age. And, embarrassingly, I have to admit that it was only 2 years ago I recognised that there was a ethnicity pay gap in pensions. But if you think about it, it's quite logical, because if you're going through your employment being paid less, guaranteed you're going to get less at the end. So, as far as I'm concerned, I just think that organisations need to recognise that these issues do exist, and also look at their practices and principles, how they structure their workloads, to be able to make sure it's not discriminating against anyone.
I mean, there are many nuances that needs to be really looked at. But let's talk a bit about solutions now. So, if I was to ask you, what practical steps can actually be taken to make sure that the ethnicity pay gap is addressed?
Well, first and foremost, which I said previously, which is about what structures are in place that are preventing people being paid fairly. So, if we go to the beginning of the recruitment stage, the person who's doing the recruitment, are you allowing them to pay people whatever they like? I'll give you one quick example, which was many years ago, I worked for an organisation and they were hiring directors. And I held the recruitment budget, so I knew what this person was supposed to be paid. However, the senior person who was above me said, "Oh no, I want this person in, and I'm going to pay. I want him to be paid £5,000 more." So by just doing that, you are changing the goalposts because you're too, So I think if for example a manager is responsible for recruiting, HR should have oversight in what they're paying people to make sure that that doesn't happen. And equally, in the promotional aspects, what barriers are occurring? Again, in our research, we found that because it's specific to Black people, Black women, in fact, were struggling to be promoted, and their white counterparts were being promoted. So these types of things that need to be addressed. So it's like looking at what is causing it to happen and making the change and making sure that people are being paid fairly. And if you are reporting, it's not good enough, as far as I'm concerned, to just report. What are you doing to close the gap? So you need to plan about how you're going to do that to make sure the gap is closed.
I agree with a lot of the things that you said. And also, you also mentioned that you wrote letters to specific people in government. And I wonder what the response has been.
Very, very poor. I did actually get an email from Kemi Badnoch a year later, and the ending said, "We are going to address this." And basically, she was trying to reassure me, which I knew was just not true. So about a week or so later, the CRED report came out. And in that report, they had, I think it was one page about the ethnicity pay gap, and they stated, "We're not going to make it mandatory. However, what we will do, we're going to help organisations to work out how to do it." So she expected me to be okay about that. No, I wasn't. I was absolutely furious. Furious is even an understatement, because you're doing nothing. But obviously, the same CRED report said there's no racism in the UK. So there you go.
Now, in your article, you did make mention of the impact of ethnicity pay gap, and of course, many ethnic minorities, who are going through this will understand. But I just want you to elaborate why this discussion is so important for us to have this in the first place.
Well, if you're thinking about the current climate that we're in, everybody is struggling, but evidence has suggested that Black, Asian, and other ethnic minorities are struggling more. We're finding it difficult to pay our bills. We're finding it difficult to do day-to-day shopping. So the ethnicity pay gap needs to be addressed to be able to address the balance at the end of the day, because the struggle that is occurring right now, everybody's suffering, but things could be a lot better if we were paid fairly.
That was my discussion with ethnicity pay gap campaigner Diane Grayson. I mean, it's good for us to have this discussion to raise awareness, because it is a phenomenon that needs to be addressed. Now we swiftly move on. As I said earlier, the Church of England has announced to pledge £100 million to address past wrongs after its investment fund was found to have historical links to slavery. Now, it gets a bit technical, so I'll take my time to try and explain this to you. Now, in its investigation, it found out that around 1777, Queen Anne's bounty had an investment worth 406,942. So, in today's money, the equivalence would be 724 pounds. Sorry, 724 million pounds. In the South Sea Company. Now, this South Sea Company, was a company that traded slaves, to which the Queen Anne's bounty invested that amount of money in. The report estimated that the South Sea Company transported around 34,000 slaves in crowded, unsanitary, unsafe, and inhumane conditions during its 30 years of operation. It's worth noting that the commissioners of the church who manage the endowment said that Compensation Fund is an effort to address past wrongs and expects to deliver a program of investment, research, and engagement over the next 9 years. Now, the question has been, how would this be distributed? Of course, we will find out very, very soon. And to join us today to discuss today's topic is Julius Baluto, who's a journalist and also editor of Informer East Africa, and Kofi Ali, ECOWAS Citizens' Rights Advocate. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on today's show.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, George.
As always, we're streaming live on Facebook. Also, you can listen to the program on GN Radio. So just download the TuneIn app or www.gnradiouk.com. Alternatively, you can download the Channel 7 app and you can watch as you go along. Take us with you. And if you're watching, make sure you share and leave your comments. I'll come to you first, Kofi. When you heard that the Church of England, putting out this substantive amount of money, well, some might say it's not enough, but this gesture.
Well, for me, to be honest with you, all along the campaign and so on, I've been far behind because I feel a lot of the issues being raised, I would say they are unrealistic and to some extent unnecessary. However, I will not belittle the concerns of those involved in making their effort. Now, when you talk about this venture we are talking about, I think the amount I saw on my post here from Daily, I think it's the Guardian or something like that, it's 9 billion pounds actually was the money involved, out of which 100 million, which is less than 0.5.
Well, it's saying that the church is worth over 10 billion.
Good. Yeah. So if this is 100 million, what they are putting down, you ask yourself, it's the slave trade, if you want to go to the slave trade and correct the errors of the time. Who is accusing who? That's the first question. I believe it's the descendant and the victims of the horror who are saying we have been wronged and we want something done. Is that not true? Now, slave trade, sometimes we minimize and belittle the concept. The Portuguese were involved. The Arabs did it for thousands of years before the Portuguese came in because transatlantic. Then you have the Spanish, South America. Yes, Brazil, they took. And then you have the Dutch. And then you have the French later. All these people, then the English. This is where the Church of England come in. So we are dealing with a drop. Now, this 100 million, we said, okay, something we've been wronged. I have been wronged. The one who believed they've wronged me should not be the one to decide how much to give me. We go to court. You did wrong me. And I say you wronged me. The day you accept you have wronged me, that is the day we go to court. You don't decide how much to try to even to appease me with. It's the court that must decide, because the big man cheats the small man wants justice. Justice will not be, oh, I think I have 100 million to spare, so come. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing, who are going to get this fund? How is it going to be distributed? The details there says a lot. 100 million in America, a huge quantity of the slaves are actually the blacks in America and those in the Caribbean. Not those on the African continent. Forget about them. What is 100 million to American? One person can put that money down, a black man today. So how do you solve that problem? Then let us come back to the British. I think the problem is here. and the church want to address it here. Now, the church has put this amount down, and they said it's not going to go to individuals. They mentioned that. Yeah. There will be a committee, and it's going to be a committee project, community project. It means the blacks here, most of them recent migrants whose parents gave birth to them here, they are British. They are the responsibility of the British government, good or bad. These young people in those communities are those they will set up the project for. So when you say it's a compensation for slave trade, I think, or any form of appeasement to slave trade, I think it's just a kind of playing with our intelligence. Totally is out of order, because the blacks here, born and brought here, but they are British. They are as good as the white boys and the Asian boys. They are all British. And if there are issues in communities, it is the state that have to dip the hand into the tax coffers to solve. And if the church want to give a helping hand, the church is always known to do those kind of things, so it's not new. But using this, I don't buy it, and I'm not falling for that trap.
Kobe, if, before I come to you, Julius, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Please.
If I heard you wrong, if I misheard you. Are you suggesting that this, Africans in Africa are not included in this? It's just slaves that were brought over.
In fact, even what they said from what I read, technically, they are not going to give Ghana government that money. They are not giving Uganda government that money. We know what they do. If they will send any money of this 100 million, which is not enough in here alone, right? If they will send any, it's go to the Catholic Church, Anglican Church in Ghana for a project inside Ghana. Can you see? And if they say that is part of the compensation and part of the assistance, the church has been doing that for so many years. So what is new here?
Okay, let's bring in Julius. Your take when you heard this announcement.
I think we tend to belittle the impact of slave trade. We also try to talk as if it was not part and parcel of colonization. We need to go back to history properly and address the whole thing in totality. When you look into, for example, 1896, Kenya became British protectorate, and you immediately see it was the missionaries who arrived before colonizers. There's a narrative very well coined in Kenya that the colonizer came one hand holding the Bible and then the other one holding the gun. So the moment they started to pray, say, let us pray, the land use of gun, the land was gone. So we have to be careful. And because of that hypocrisy, immediately after Kenya's independence, there was an emergency of new churches, which were formed as a rebellion towards what missionaries with the colonizers had done. And you find churches which are African names, like African Brotherhood Church. How about that? That's cool. It's not different scene from the colonizers. So what we need to capture, the government of Britain worked hand in hand with missionaries during colonization of Africa. Now, when we understand that particular context, we come to the UK. 1703 is when all this business of slave trade began. Kicked up momentum all the way to 1793, thereabout, and this is the particular time. We are talking about this company that was trading. South Sea Company was trading, very active. Yeah. And even they formed another one, the Royal African, to now be the one that operates the slave trade business, and it became such a huge business. Now, when we come to today to talk about 100 million, let's also get this in context. The slave trade business around that particular time I mentioned in the UK was worth over 600,000 plus pounds. In today's equivalent value, that is over 10 billion. And therefore today the argument has been, if you really want to say you are compensating or trying to, you need to dish out at least over 1 billion, not 1 million.
To who?
No, I'm coming to that. you need to set aside over £1 billion. Now the next question is, there's no framework within which this compensation is going to happen. Nothing spelled out, no mechanism, no framework. Is totally zero. There's nothing there. Then again, you come to when you are compensating someone, say offended. Was there consultation before the announcement of the amount to be compensated? No, there was no consultation. So again, you want to find out how will the Church of England begin to identify the victims of slave trade, even in the UK alone. And then again, how do they think £1 million is enough to compensate those victims?
100 million.
100 million. Is that enough to compensate these victims? Then again, who will be, talking about where the money should go? And also, let's talk about generations which have come over this. I'll cite a case. I was covering the Mau Mau veterans case. They sued British government. It was in Royal Court of Justice. For a long time, I was covering that for BBC. The first argument that came is the first time we went to court for them to present this case. The UK government says, we're young. That time your country was colonized. All of us, our MPs, the Prime Minister, were young people.
Julius,
they were not informed.
I'll just interject for a brief moment because it's time for us to go on a break. When we come back, we will talk more. Don't forget to share. We'll be back right after this.
You see, are we on break?
I'm so hungry. This I want to kill me.
I'll save you, Grandpa.
Go and get Grandpa's dinner.
Okay.
Whether you're looking for poundo in your crayfish stock, all-purpose seasoning, or any other ingredient, Tropical Salt has everything you need.
Hey, no. Take the pancit yam. My strong young man. My hero. Hey.
Mommy's a real hero.
Tropical Sun, flavors of the world to your table.
Leatherback helps you move your money securely from one country to another with ease. With over 20 currencies to choose from, including Indian rupee, Naira, Ghanaian cedi, and US dollar, with Leatherback you can move money anytime, anywhere. Simply sign up, verify your identity, and you're ready to add money to your account. Leatherback is licensed in 4 countries, and with full visibility of your cash flow via our dashboard, you're in control. One access, one platform, one world. Download the Leatherback app and let the journey begin.
I'm so hungry. This I want to kill me.
I'll save you, Grandpa.
Go and get Grandpa's dinner.
Okay.
Whether you're looking for poundo in your crayfish stock, all-purpose seasoning, or any other ingredient, Tropical Salt has everything you need.
Hey, no. Take the pancit yam. My strong young man. My hero. Hey.
Mommy's a real hero.
Tropical Sun, flavors of the world to your table.
Welcome back to the program. If you just tune in, we're talking about the fact that Church of England decided to pay £100 million for their links with slavery. With this particular subject, it was actually, not that it was difficult, but we didn't really want to coin a question around it because it's complex as it is. So, but it would be good to hear your take about this, whether you think it is enough or not enough, or whether you think it should be, it's a good gesture that could help communities as they're claiming, communities that have suffered as a result of slavery. Before we went on the break, Julius, let me come back to you.
Yeah, so I introduced a statement there, an argument there, talking about the linkage between colonization and slave trade. The linkage there is atrocities committed under the watch of the UK government. Remember, in 1703, when our slave trade was kicking off, the British government was still in power. Remember now, the colonization also, when it happened, the British government was still in power. At no particular point did you see either the royal family or the British government condemn slavery, condemn colonization. It was business as usual, and that's a link. Now, why is it also linked to the Church of England? It was still the Church of England all that time. And the church, just like the state, the church never came to condemn the actions of these people who came from Britain. Why is UK important? Because England, by the way, they colonized almost everyone in the UK. In the world. America was once upon a time British colony. So when you look at the dynamics of the Church of England and colonization in the UK is pretty huge. And when we come to talk about 1807, March 1807, when slave trade was stopped, of course we are talking about William Wilberforce, when he took a bill in Parliament that time to kick off the debate about ending slave trade. Of course, it was fronted by Sons of Africa, who were abolitionists that time. When you look into that, then you come to find a picture whereby you want to ask yourself, since 1703, today is 2023, where was Church of England's 100 million? That's where I was coming to. So when I look at it today, I want to pick up from the history of covering the Mau Mau case. These are old people. Anyone who was a Mau Mau veteran in Kenya, they are close to 100 or whatever. During the case, which was sad enough, while it was going on, some of them were dying. So I just want to tell you today, anyone who can claim to be victim of slave trade may not be the actual person, may be the descendant. And the descendant may not have the same outlook and understanding of slave trade like the real person who went through it. And therefore, what does even compensation mean to these groups of people? Again, you argued very well that what Church of England has done before is not very different from what it may want to do today. If you're saying you're going to invest in communities, do even those communities understand what slave trade was all about? How much education, how much consultation should go into this? I mean, that's what I'm coming to, because it's a complex matter. It's very complex. It's not as straightforward as we think it is. So when I look into the government of the UK also, are they going to be willing to be even engaged in the conversation by the Church of England?
That's another conversation to have, isn't it? The fact that, I mean, if I was to ask you right now, Kofi, the head of state in the UK, King, the head of Church of England, King Charles, yes. Right? So, in a way, can one argue that, you know, by virtue, it is the state that's actually pushing forward this agenda?
Well, indirectly, the church and the state in this part of the world are the same. The church has always been, in fact, the politicians, sometimes that's why you see churches everywhere you go to in this country. Politics was from the church until under the king, until things start changing, reforms. But you see, I always believe we, this generation, have a duty to come up with solutions. But the only way we can come up with solutions, as we are talking now, we're educating people, is we should talk within context and be precise on what we want people to hear. It is totally wrong to model slave trade with the colonization. They have some seemingly form of connection.
Yes.
They are totally different things. Totally. Slave trade, at the time it was taking place, in fact, it was just like colonization. They were lawful acts. It was not one state or nation in Europe that was involved. All the European powers. The first slaves that were taken from the Gold Coast at the time, 1471, by the Portuguese, there were just 7 of them. Locals brought them at the marketplace to sell them. And those traders who have come from Europe saw them and they bought them. And then it seems to be fetching more money. And that then got, and then when they discover America, South America, they started needing more people to move and so on and so forth. What I want to say here is that at the time the slave trade ended by Wilberforce, as my brother rightly said, it was later the idea of colonization came in. Initially, the state itself. You see, if you are British, if you are Portuguese, they are looking for raw material, so they went out into the countries. Can you see what they were buying from the locals are raw material, like they were doing in Asia, India, East Indian Company. But it was later you will realize that is it what's the name of this man? Sir Charles McCarthy.
Right.
He was actually in this country, Sierra Leone, later when the king, because you are citizens, so you are trading on behalf of your nation. So the countries do support them indirectly. It was later, during the colonization, the countries themselves were involved. Can you see how they did the thing? Initially, the countries were not there, but their merchants are those who have settled in those places.
Yes.
Good. So if you look at it in that context, during the colonization itself, the country now started coming in because the French want the land, Portuguese want the land. For example, when we talk about Ghana or Gold Coast or Kenya, we talk as if it has been there before colonization. It was not there.
Of course.
They were tribal kingdoms. It was this colonization, the German want to go, this one want, so they started fighting. Some, they even trade money. So that is different from the slavery.
Well, but slavery did enable colonization. I'll tell you why. Because historically, what happened with slavery is that majority of the slaves were men. And of course, it was a commodity at the time.
And who were catching them?
Well, when it became commodities, the white people, white men, the foreigners were also catching them. And I know where you're going with
What I'm
this.
saying is that
there
were buyers and sellers. We are dealing with part of the problem.
Hold on. No. Of course there were buyers.
They're sellers.
But what I'm saying is slavery did enable colonization. Because as soon as the likes of Great Britain went into the Americas and the Caribbeans and the plantation fields, they needed the labor force. And this is what triggered colonization. So you cannot separate the two. And I know where you're going with the fact that Africans also sold Africans, right? And I know
that's not even the
that's
part
not where you're going.
No, yes, it's implied. Okay. I said that. No. But where I want to touch on, see, when they got to America, right, where they were running the plantations originally were not on the African continent. They were in America, where the
Americas.
The Americans, there were no Americans as you know them. There were the Red Indians.
The continent Americas.
And there are Red Indians there.
Yeah.
And they did what? They exterminated and encourage people from here to move there. So they needed labor force, people to work with them. At that time, there was no much. That was when they started transporting people from the African continent there, because that is where the farming activities, because the whites from here, they know how to do the kind of farming. So the blacks are coming to give hand. But the mode of transporting them is where the problem. You go to into them and catch them by force and take them. That is where the horror. Tie them down, feed them to the shark. This is where and they don't want to go. But the Europeans, people they took to Australia, most of them initially they were prisoners. Then they started going themselves. Yeah. The same thing with America. But in our case, the African continent, the blacks, they don't want to go, but they have to force them. The forcing mechanism then became a commercialized thing. And it was painful. We agree. What we have to look at is, it was after that has gone for hundreds of years. Now the French are interested, the Germans are interested, the Danes are interested, the Dutch are interested, because the Portuguese, like we see, started. In fact, those who drove
what we want to focus on more is the compensation by Church of England.
Then we shouldn't be talking about colonization.
No, yes, we should, because there is a link. I talked about having covered a case by veterans. The atrocities committed to them were not in magnitude, were as high as the one that slave trade was perpetuating upon Africans from the African ground.
In your place.
That is the link.
Where you come from.
No, forget about
where I come from. We don't have that problem.
Yeah.
So forget we come from different parts of Africa.
It doesn't matter.
No, it matters. Because let me do something
Let me finish my sentence.
The Maos, who were they were fighting the British.
Let me finish my sentence, because we all have different experiences.
Exactly, so we should look at it differently.
But what I have to say is, I'm an African. I know I've known about African issues. Kenya,
and I'm Ghanaian.
Kenya is
so we are
Africa.
Different.
Kenya is in Africa. If you don't remember that.
No, so you speak for yourself.
Okay.
I speak for myself.
Exactly. Give me the right to speak for myself. Right? Even if it's Kenya, whatever.
Yeah, talk about Kenya.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about Africa because I'm also African.
Me too, I'm African, but that's
I'm not talking about Ghana. I'm talking about Africa.
Let Julius finish, please. Then obviously I'll come to
the atrocities committed to those who were taken as slaves from Africa were similar in nature to those which were perpetrated to people who were colonized. When you come and take people by force, you torture them and you bundle them, put them in a ship and lock them away. The pain they go through is just like when you meet people during colonialism and you shoot them and they die. It's not different. I'm speaking about atrocities committed to Africans, and I have the right to say that. So when you look into that dynamism, I'll come back to England here, because our conversation is more about England. Then you ask yourself, this compensation, 100 million, is it enough? And when you look pan across Africa, where slaves came from to either go to US or Portugal or to go to UK, how do you begin to compensate these people? Then my next question is to put this in proper context, whereby we ask ourselves the question, you are in Africa, whether Ghana or any other country, you heard the Church of England has set aside some money to compensate. Maybe your grandpa or mom was a victim of slavery. How do you even begin to connect with the Church of England? So we want to call out this for what it is. Is it practical? This kind of 100 million, is it practical? Does it even go anywhere near to compensate anyone? So when we talk about reparation to African countries, they are different in nature. When you come to Ghana, you talk about the golden stool. Yeah? Serious conversation, a reality on the ground. Will it come from the UK, go back to Ghana? In what way? When you talk about Kenya, there are other things that were taken in terms of artifacts, name them. You go to other countries, the same thing happened. But we have to understand, for us to have some sense and win in this, we have to see ourselves as Africans before we talk about petty nationalism.
I think before you come in, I think it's worth noting that other entities also invested in this company. These included the Bank of England, scientific pioneers such as Sir Isaac Newton, and members of the ruling class of European nationalities, including King Philip V of Spain. So I just wanted to put it out there. And also, the Church of England were quick to mention that this amount of money is not reparation, because no amount of money can be given to kind of like, to say, as a result of slavery, this is how much we're given. So I think it's worth to know that. Don't you?
You see, this is a very sensitive subject, and I get it, and I understand. Can you see? But I see things totally different. However, when I'm invited to talk about this, I want us to be serious.
We are serious.
Now listen to me, you'll get me when I'm saying we are talking about different things. We may look alike. I said something earlier. Do you remember the Anglo-Ashanti War? Do you remember how many heads were chopped off? Do you remember our kings sent to exiles?
Yeah.
Do we go for compensation for that? It was when the colonization was taking place after the slave trade. So when we come talking about Mau just recently, as if there was Kenya, at that time, what the British were doing, they were forming what you are proud of today called Kenya. They were forming Ghana. But the way we understand it, we thought they are imposing something on us. Naturally, we resisted. So that is, but it's different from slave trade, catching people and taking them to somewhere where they don't want to go. The two look alike, but they are different things. What I want to do is...
Hold on. Let me come in here. So what's the difference of extracting resources and, repatriating people from their own land?
No, see.
Is that, no,
no,
is there
no, see. One, they were taking you away. They are not interested where you are. They are not interested in anything. They are just catching people and taking them away. Chain them. This second one, they are circling, be patient. They are circling you. So when you are going to work to produce wealth. The second one, they are not taking you away from where you are. They are circling you, that this tribe, that tribe, now you work as one with a central authority. The two are different.
No, what I'm saying is it was all for economic gains.
Of
economic
course.
benefits. Right. So we need to look at it in its totality. Hold on, Kofi. So what I'm saying is during the slave trade,
yes,
the commodity were slaves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
For economic gains.
So we want to talk about it.
No. But I'm just saying there's the link between the two.
They look
then
alike.
colonization comes in. It is natural resources that are extracted from the land. And that's what I'm saying, there's a link. So if you're trying to say there's different, I don't agree with that proposition.
See, can you see?
Who is a slave?
Can you see?
Who is a slave?
Be patient with
no,
me. The day we
this
had
right.
our
Who is a slave?
independence, be patient with me. The day we had our independence in Ghana, and our president stood where the governor general was standing, and all of us from different tribes were clapping, happy. Now we are a new nation. Now I can travel from northern Ghana to southern Ghana without any fear that the man from the other tribe will, because we have a central government. Do we say these people should pay? If they say we should pay them for that, can we? Or we say, oh, we didn't ask you to come and form a country for us, we will have done it ourselves. Before they came, what were we doing? So you see, let us look at where we gain and look at where we lose. And the church is not saying they are compensating Ghana for colonizing them. That word we call colonization. Colonization is when the state is there. Can you see? There is a clear country. They have their leader, like you have in Ukraine. And the Russians come in, remove the leader. There was a country. In our case, there was no country. There were kingdoms. So they put us together by force because either we're fighting ourselves or we are not working together. If we are working together, they wouldn't have even in the first place been able to deport us and take us to another land. But you see, the two look alike. However, they did what they did for their own selfish economic interests.
Yes.
Both ways. Now, let us pull back now. The first one, what did we gain from it? You took people away. We got nothing. Maybe the people in America can say, well, after all, now they don't need visa to go to America because they are citizens there. If they didn't, but that is, they will answer that. It's a sensitive issue. Some will prefer they are in African continent. Some are happy where they found themselves. But as today, the church here, they said they want to give compensation of 100 million. What is 100 million to Ghana government? One man stole that money the last time. We should be talking about that one. So what we want to do here, right? Let us look at what they want to do and they are doing in their interest, because they are still calling the shots.
All right.
We don't call the
Let
shots.
them bring you, Julius.
The proper definition of a slave is a person who is forced to work for and obey another and is considered to be their own property.
Mm-hmm.
During colonization of African countries, a lot of people were working for the colonizers against their own will on the ground in Africa. They were their slaves. We talk about today modern slavery. Why do we talk about that? Because of those aspects of slavery, which you are forced to do something and you are used as a slave for someone else to benefit. So let's not just be so simplistic. And sometimes we talk as if we want to justify, as if Africa was not there, quite there, as if it was crafted and made. That's nonsense. That's why you go to Zimbabwe, you find Victoria Falls had a name, an African name. But George Livingstone begins to say, I found this force, I will rename them Victoria Falls. The same guy who come to East Africa, he found a lake, the largest one connecting 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. It had an African name, but he names it Victoria, Lake Victoria. This nonsense of justifying colonization and speaking as if it created African countries, I want to say a vehement no. And I want to argue that African countries were there before anyone was there. Whichever administrative tools they had right to exist. Whether they were renamed or not, they were there, and that's a fact of history. No one can ever change. So colonization was not a good thing. There was no benefit of colonization, nothing at all. It was all a question of taking everything from Africa, shipping it out of the continent. And when we talk about modern slavery, when we talk about modern colonization, the same thing is still happening. While we are yapping across different continents, thinking about we benefit. There's no benefit for that. Look at Democratic Republic of Congo or the war over minerals. It never gets stability because of that. And we are still complaining, saying African countries benefited from colonization. They never did. And when we talk about slavery, we want to look at it in totality from how it works. When we go to USA, America as a country, the only country that civil war was triggered by slave trade was USA. Southern states didn't want slave trade to end because they were formed an agricultural setup. Slaves used to work on the farms. When northern part of USA decided that, okay, this slave thing is not good, they wanted to end it because northern part of America was built on capitalism and economy or whatever. The southern states said no, triggering civil war in the US. So if slavery can trigger war in US, why do we want to simplify it? Why do we want to talk as if, okay, these guys were really cool, they came and gave countries names? I don't buy that.
Let me just play devil's advocate here with you, Julius, because we're talking about whether it's reparations or gesture or whatever the situation may be. Prior to the Berlin Conference, which of course Europeans sat down and demarcated the continent of Africa. Now we're talking about tribes at the time, right? Just playing the devil's advocate here. Of course, for a tribe to become prominent within society, it conquers other tribes. Mm-hmm. So maybe one argument being, at that time, conquest was the way of life, so to speak. So in that case, are we then suggesting that other tribes which were conquered by other tribes should also pay compensation?
I don't think so. I think purely what we need to focus on is just slavery. We need to focus on colonization. When we talk about reparations, we need to talk about those things. We need to understand countries whose wealth was taken or their artifacts and things were stolen. Come to London, 7 kilometers of museums, or composed of wealth taken from other countries. Tower of London, Queen jewels from Africa, South Africa, and other countries. You see, you cannot, when we speak like that, we are piecing the people who done that by trying to tell them, yeah, you did us a favor, you gave names to our countries.
Let me give you a few minutes left to Kofi.
You see, we can sit down crying baby. Oh, we are victims. Oh, we are this. Oh, we are this. You asked a question, and you said, even there was a time that it's all about the stronger conquering the weak. Either the same race, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, they were all conquered. Germans conquered this, or between race. Can you see? And you have somebody sitting on air saying that, oh, when we did it, it was fine among ourselves. But when outsiders did it, it's wrong because they are of different race. But what did he realize? That something is wrong with us. And until we learn to be honest to ourselves, we'll continue to be in this mess. Why didn't they go to China and name their rivers for them? Why didn't go to Russia and go and name their rivers for them? Till now, we ran away to Washington together after we've done our tribal things. We are part of this problem. Actually, we are the problem. Because on that African continent, if we can say, okay, these people have come. This is what they created. This is what they created. This is what they created. Good or bad, they are gone. Now we are in charge. What do? We will know where we are going. Because it's about the stronger, the powerful, and the conquered.
All right.
We are the conquered.
Let me just give you a few seconds to Julius to respond, and then we need to go.
I am unbogable. Africans are unbogable. You never conquer them. Devices may come, ways or whatever, Africa stands. And one day, Africa shall be free, only when we unite and speak with one voice.
Okay, on that note, thank you for watching. And of course, thank you to Kofi Ali and Julius for coming in today. Keep the conversation going on our social media platforms. We've come to the end of the show. We'll be back here, same place, same time next week. Until then, enjoy the rest of your evening. It's goodbye from us.
Talk platform.
I'm so hungry. This aroma to kill me.
I'll save you, Grandpa.
Go and get Grandpa's dinner.
Okay.
Whether you're looking for poundo in your crayfish stock, all-purpose seasoning, or any other ingredient, Tropical Salt has everything you need.
Hey, no. Take the panted yam. My strong young man.
My hero.
Hey.
Mommy's a real hero.
Tropical Salt, flavors of the world to your table.
Leatherback helps you move your money securely from one country to another with ease. With over